Welcome to the Foreign Tigers podcast with me, Louis.
And with me, Eric.
Louis, how much news do you read?
Well, probably more than the average member of the public, but sometimes these days, following everything gets a bit depressing. We shall mention no names, which is probably exactly what our guest this week wants to hear, considering they're a journalist. I'm very happy to welcome Raphael Rashid to the show.
Thank you for having me. Happy New Year.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today. We're so happy to chat with you. And just to introduce you briefly, you're a Seoul-based freelance journalist who's been reporting from South Korea for more than a decade. Your work focuses on Korean politics, society, and human rights, and has appeared in outlets including The Guardian, The New York Times, Nikkei Asia, and Elle magazine. He is also the author of The Korea We Refuse to See. But most importantly, you're a fellow alumni of Korea University after graduating from Korean Studies. So it gives us a great pleasure to call you Sundae. So
thank you very much.
Of course. Yeah, you and Louis also share another university in common, I believe, not just KU. But from what I've heard, you also graduated from SOAS, University of London, with your bachelor's in Japanese and Korean.
That's right. So I suppose my first question has to be whether the fact that the Second World War headquarters of the UK's Ministry of Information inspired you to become a journalist, given that it was literally part of the SOAS campus.
I guess the short answer is no, but I mean, who knows? Maybe it was subconscious. I actually had heard that had been the case at the time. I can't remember if it was supposed to be a rumor or if it was true at the time. But certainly the building in which SOAS is housed is quite mysterious, and the building kind of opposite, called Senate House, looks like a kind of relic from the Soviet era, filled with secrets. But I think it was maybe the curiosity of other students coming from around the world with stories from around the world that I think probably subconsciously, opened my mind to eventually going into journalism.
Was it something that you thought about as like when you were growing up, or was it at university it started to develop and grow inside?
Honestly speaking, it didn't happen until I actually came to Korea. I never really thought that I could be a journalist. I think it had always crossed my mind, but I never had the confidence or thought that I could actually write properly. I thought that you have to go to journalism school to be a journalist, and that you had to have formal training. So I never had the confidence to think about doing it. But it was only until when I arrived in Korea full time that I thought that maybe there would be an opportunity.
So I'm curious because you mentioned having that confidence to actually become a journalist. So is there some moment that started your career, or some moment that gave you that confidence? Did it start with small steps? Can you just walk us through how it actually goes from being this small thought in the back of your head to being something that you actually practice?
I guess it all happened a bit organically when I first arrived in Korea in, I think it was 2011. I started off a blog about Korea, and that blog gained quite a lot of traction and clicks, and people seemed to be interested in what was going on in Korea. And I came here as a student of Korean studies, and even though the course was taught in English, a lot of the materials that I wanted to consume were in Korean, but also in English. And when I saw the content that was being pumped out in English about Korea at the time, I thought that a lot of it was very lacking, and I kind of felt like I could do a better job. As in, of course, I'm not blaming the entire media environment at the time, but it's just that, say there's 100 stories happening in Korea in one day, but English speaking media can only focus on one or two. And I was looking at 10 or 20 happening in any given day. And I was like, well, what about this? What about that? So I was trying to fill a kind of gap in the market by talking about different issues on a kind of on a kind of blog platform. And so I guess, without any formal training, I started writing pieces here and there. And I guess one thing led to another. And eventually, at one point, I started pitching to different media around the world, saying, there's this issue happening in Korea. Would you be interested in a piece? But again, even when I did that, I didn't have much confidence because to be perfectly honest, I didn't even know what an editor was. So I didn't realize that, you don't need to, you don't need to necessarily be the best and most competent person at writing the most beautiful sentence in the world. That's the role of editors. And so I didn't really realize that editors are there to help raise the game and make a good piece great. And I think it's only later that I realized that when you write an article, it's not just you alone. It's actually a team of people that will help get the best out of a story and help you, even maybe ask the right questions and navigate you in a certain direction. So I guess I learned the hard way, but it was a learning curve, and it it helped me over the years, and I'm still learning today. Believe it or not, I'm still learning how to craft the best article possible.
I mean, it takes you say you felt like you lacked confidence, but it takes a special kind of person to say, well, I'm just going to do this and dive in and then send those emails to be like, hey, I want to write for you. So I think you've done yourself proud, definitely. But like, I just want to rewind just a little bit. What brought you to Korea? I mean, we've done a little bit of background research on you, and I noticed that you mentioned that you started your undergrad with computer science. I did computing, so we're another similarity is there. But like, you left that and then studied Japanese and Korean for your undergraduates, and then eventually you came here. So where did Korea come from?
Yeah. Um, you know, it sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and then I just remember, oh, there was that thing that triggered me, and then there was a different thing. And every time I feel like there's always a different excuse that pops up. So it's very difficult for me to pinpoint exactly. But I guess if I go back in the past, at even when I was at high school, for example, there was a course next to my house, and they were offering beginner Japanese. And if you were under 18, it was free. So I was like, well, I might as well do it. So I was I think I was at 15 or 16 already exposed to the Far East, so to speak. And I was, also, I was always fascinated in this part of the world, but on TV, you heard a lot about Japan, a lot about China. Not that I was an expert in any of that, but there was always that country in the middle, that so-called nuclear, you know, Kim Il Sung country with nuclear missiles, and I wasn't really too sure because, you know, South South Korea seems to be a rich and prosperous country. Yet we talk about North Korea, and I wasn't, I didn't fully understand it. And so I guess Japan was, of course, the easy way in, and it was a lot more. It was easier to convince my parents that I was going to go for backpacking in Japan as opposed to South Korea. But I guess that was also a soft landing. I did go to Japan fresh out of high school after graduating from my A levels, and was exposed kind of indirectly to Korea while I was in Japan. Um, And then I was doing computer science at university, and I absolutely hated it. Why did I do it? Because I thought I wanted to become rich and work for a conglomerate or something. I just thought that was the natural way forward. Having done math and further maths for my A levels and physics, so I just thought that engineering was the right way forward for me. And I was while I was doing computer science at York University, I remember absolutely hating it. I failed all my exams. I was probably the worst in the class. There were 120 of us. I think I was probably at the very bottom. I didn't understand what programming was, but somehow I managed to get a scholarship, uh, and and suddenly I had this like magic money that appeared in my bank account. So I was thinking, well, what am I going to do with this money? And I remember there was a cheap flight to South Korea, so that's kind of where it was. Well, one of the reasons, and I went to South Korea, did some backpacking, and then I guess the rest is history. I came back from South Korea the next day. I quit my course in computer science, and then I applied to do Japanese and Korean studies at SOAS in London, and you know, the rest is history.
That's a great use of your scholarship money for computer science to go across the world and find a new course to do.
Right. Something in that because I think we all have this experience of first coming into Korea and kind of wondering like, wow, like, well, like, what are we in for? Like, what are we doing here? And of course, having different first impressions. So I'm just curious to know when you first got here. It sounds like from your explanation, Korea was a bit of a mystery to you. When you first came here, what was it like, right? And what were the first impressions you had of Korea?
Yeah, I got here. It was February 2006, and I still remember I rocked up at Seoul Station. I didn't even have any bookings, and I just opened the Lonely Planet guide, and it said go to Jongno-sanga for one or two guest houses. So I showed up at the guest house, and there were only two at the time. And then they said, "Oh, we have a bed for tonight, but not for tomorrow. So your best bet is to go down to Busan." So I stayed one night, and there were a few foreigners, but I really during my entire 3 week trip, I barely met any foreigners. The only ones that I did meet were either English teachers or on holiday or friends and family of US military. But they weren't, I don't remember meeting any foreign tourists per se at the time. Nothing was, I mean, there was barely anything in English. Um, Everywhere I went was you were kind of the guest because you were the only one to rock up. When I went to Busan the next day, there were no guest houses or youth hostels or something for broke students. So I was recommended a woman's house, and I went to a woman's house in Busan. She had an extra bedroom, and she set up two or three bunk beds. So that was Busan's first so-called guest house. And I still remember when I was in this woman's house, Lonely Planet knocked on the door to come and inspect, and then it eventually became the first guest house in the guidebook. So that's how, if you go today, if you go to Haeundae, to be honest, anywhere around town, it's like a million foreigners, guest houses, and um, foreign tourist paradise. It wasn't at all like that back then. Um, Not to say I don't think it was difficult, because even though I couldn't speak the language or really understand what was going on, I still remember anywhere I went, everyone was always very welcoming. I just walked into a restaurant and I didn't know what was going on, and I was just hoping they don't serve me anything that I considered disgusting. But every time I would just be like, maybe say one or two words like "Hi, feed me," basically, and then the food would come out, and fingers crossed. But every time, that was my formula, because I didn't know there were no English menus. But every time the food came out, and it was always delicious and reasonably priced, and everyone always helped me along the way. And yeah, I had a really, really great time. And that was 20 years ago. Things have changed so much since then.
Yeah, I think there'll be some of our listeners of the younger generation who'll be like, "Well, why didn't you just Papa Go it?" And it's like, no, they did 2006, no Papa Go, no iPhone.
No smartphones.
Crazy. That must have been really like that must have been next level hard. Like, did you bring like a phrase book at all, or was you literally just fighting for your life on your own?
Yeah, while I was studying, you know, computer science, I was sitting at the back of the class, learning the Korean script, Hangul, and so um, it certainly helped to be able to just read signs in the street, even though it was very basic. So just to navigate and like know where I'm going, I think that was very useful. But aside from that, everyone was very happy to help, very curious to help a lost foreigner. Um, People were still taking photos of me in the street. You know how, I mean, I don't know. It sometimes happens when I go to China, especially if it's a small city. And then sometimes you have people from like provincial towns that are coming to the city for the day, and then they see me and they snap a photo. So that still happens to me if I go to China, but that was happening when that happened 20 years ago in Korea. Not obviously not anymore.
It's a different world. I mean, so with the differences that you've seen here in Korea, but what has surprised you the most that about outsider perceptions, of Korea? Like you actually mentioned briefly that all you really heard and kind of the impetus for your journalist spat into journalism was you know hearing about North Korea and then only getting like one or two stories about the South, this big industrial rising economy. So what surprised you about that outsiders are learning about Korea?
Yeah, just that Korea, the moment you land, you're in a modern country. And that just that very fact that this is a modern, economically developed country, um, at, at the time, of course, before coming here, I guess I knew that, but seeing it in real life, seeing all the skyscrapers and how everything was so modern, I think no matter how much you read about it, especially back in the days, and then seeing it in reality, I think that's what stood out to me the most. I remember sending a postcard back to my family in London, and the postcard is just a bunch of apartment blocks. It's like a very boring city line of Seoul, but I deliberately chose that postcard because I wanted to show my family this place is modern. You know, everything that you've told me about be careful of the nuclear missiles. All of that is wrong. Look at this place. It's 10 times more developed than, where you guys are from. Yeah. Um, and so that's kind of what I wanted to, to prove that life does exist here. And it's vibrant and it's clean and it's modern and it's delicious. And there's so many things to to be discovered and to learn. And I want to kind of be part of that and learn and discover all these things. I've always been kind of the person who wants to do the thing that others don't do. So, if everyone goes on holiday to Australia or Thailand, I want to always go to the place that no one else has been to. And I guess that was also maybe one of the reasons that 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 pushed me to Korea, was to this kind of unique place that no one knew about. But now I feel like everyone knows Korea and everyone wants to come here. So now that kind of unique secret is out of the box.
No, I think it's interesting how you talk about Korea's modernity, because I do think there is this, like, I'll just say, like, I have some friends who have been in Korea for a long time, who visited in like the 80s, and when you look at the photos from that, you see a country in the middle of development. So I think it's really interesting the point in time that you come there, because especially because nowadays when people think of Korea, I do think they think of it as this really modern, developed country with great technology, great infrastructure, like a booming entertainment industry. So something I'm curious to know is, like, how much of it was already there, like the stuff that we see now. How much of it do you think was already there the entire time and just hadn't been discovered? And how much of it has changed? And those parts that did change, what's the most noticeable among those changes?
Yeah, to be honest, I think I mean, I can't speak about the past and beyond my own experience, but um, 20 years ago, I think everything was already here. Um, the big the big buildings were here. The modern um, airport was here. The transport system was here. The KTX was already here for, I think, you know, d- during the World Cup or pre or post World Cup. Um, I think all the infrastructure was here, and I don't think, to be honest, I don't think much has changed in that regard. Um, the only thing that has changed, I think, to be honest, as with any other country, is the convenience of it all, especially through online services and apps, and using our phone wherever we go. I think that's what's kind of, life was already convenient. I just think it's gotten a lot more convenient. So I know, as foreigners living in Korea, we can be a little bit entitled and complain about everything. But honestly, I think we have it very um, easier than the past, I would say. And if in the past you had the banking app only in Korean, then a few years later it was in English. Now it's just multilingual. And even if you call up for these services, again, in the past it was in English, sorry, in Korean. Now you have some of these hotlines have 5 or 6 languages. So I think, we can't have it all, but it's become a very livable place to be in, I think.
Okay, I'm going to take this in a different direction then. So, in your book, would you mind telling us the Korean title?
Yeah, it's 우리 보지 못하는 대한민국.
And that roughly translates to.
Well, I translated it to the Korea we cannot see, or the Korea we do not see, something like that.
And in it, you talk about unhappiness in South Korea almost as like a structural feature of the system. And, you mentioned about convenience and it improving. And what I'm wondering is, you know, convenience hasn't led to an uplift in happiness. Really, if we were honest. And if you had to pinpoint like one non-obvious mechanism, or something beyond cram schools, the long hours that people work, um, housing costs, that quietly manufactures unhappiness here, like what would it be?
Um, I think, um, I mean, this is obviously subject to a lot of debate, but I would, the one word that comes out is conformity. Um, uh, Obviously, I can't say that this applies to everyone, to entire society, but I do feel like um, conformity is one of the things that um, might prevent people to be 100% happy. When I, by, it's, I think it, whether it's due to societal pressures or due to cultural reasons, that's not for me to say. But I mean, for example, these days when we talk about the low birth rate issue, um, and it being difficult to raise a child, and it's the cost of raising a child can be very expensive, especially when they after kind of kindergarten and they start going to these hagwon or private academies and whatnot. A lot of people around me say they agree that they don't want to, but when it actually comes to it, they have to do it because everyone else does it. And if you don't do it, then you are seen as the bad mother, the bad father. And, people might um, compare your child and, might even get bullied at school. So eventually, it happens to a lot of my friends. Eventually, they give in and they have no choice but to send their children to these cram schools or whatever. And I feel, I mean, my theory, I guess, is that uh, it's difficult to stick out, to stand out. If you do, then you are seen as the odd one out, and the kind of delinquent. And I just feel that that is one of the reasons why people might not be so happy, because you have to go to you have to go to a good school, then you have to go to a good university, then you have to go to a good company, then you have to find a good partner, have a good wedding ceremony, have a nice house, have a nice car that's black or white. And I just feel like when you follow this prescribed way of living, I personally don't believe that this is what leads to the happiness of everyone in society.
Yeah, I mean, they say comparison is the thief of joy, right? So, constantly comparing yourself.
Well, okay, so I'm interested when you talk about conformity because I think as foreigners we can sometimes see it, but we're also and in some ways we do change, like living here, right? You kind of pick up some like habits and customs that are more Korean, but also just by the nature of us being from foreign countries, we don't pick it up entirely either. We have our own way of doing things. So I'm kind of curious. I want to go back to your start in journalism because you talked about, you said earlier that you were seeing certain stories were being covered, um, and there was just this gap in them. So I'm interested to know, like, what was that gap you saw? You talked about your first impression in terms of just like how you saw Korea, but like what were those stories that you first noticed? And do you think that being on the outside played a role in helping you observe those stories and then pick them apart first?
Yeah, good question. I guess back then, I guess the main stories that you would see in English, I think the biggest one of the biggest stories was plastic surgery. It was either plastic surgery, North Korea, or kind of crazy K-pop, maybe. Um, those are the three main stories that generated a lot of attention. And I remember as a student here, a lot of these media, even in the UK and in the US, would contact me because they needed an in when they came to Korea. And I was a little bit dumb and naive, and I would help them. But I remember they would come over and then they would say, we need help to do our story on plastic surgery, how every Korean has plastic surgery and in dystopia and all this stuff. And at the beginning, unfortunately, I was kind of indirectly was helping these kind of to fuel these kind of narratives. Suicide capital of the world. And so I wanted to push back against those stories. Of course, North Korea is interesting, but at this, like for example, the sad North Korean de facto story will always be a hot seller even today. But I also at the time befriended a few friends who were born in North Korea, and their stories were completely different. Of course, maybe they do have a tragic or traumatic past, but a lot of them just want to get on with their lives and live plentiful lives in South Korea and try and move on and not always be stuck in the past. And so I felt like, why are we not talking about the happy side, so to speak? And why do we have to focus on these? Of course, I'm not to say that these stories are not important, but I just felt that there was always a different side to stories. I guess a lot of friends or friends of friends were involved in kind of labor rights issues, and I always, I don't know if I have um, I guess I'm a bit more. Sometimes I'm always more interested in kind of the underdog of society and kind of hearing about their stories, and so I just kind of slowly got um, getting to know different groups and people and hearing different stories, and I was like, what? Why are we not talking about your story and beyond plastic surgery? And I guess that's kind of what grabbed my attention. I don't think I don't know whether I was an outsider helped or not, but I just think um, a lot of the stories that I talk about or write about or tweet about are not my stories per se. These are the stories of friends or people around me. Um, so I was always interested in talking about these stories that people have never really heard of. Um, and yeah, I kind of maintained that over the years. And surprisingly, when it comes to North Korea, I've actually probably only written about North Korea, I think 3 times in my life, or 3 or 4 times. I might be wrong, but basically, I don't do it for a living.
Which is kind of weird considering you did your master's thesis on North Korea, right?
Yeah, it's funny because when I was a student here, I was really, really, I was into this whole North Korea stuff. It was my thesis, um, but I I got very uh, disenfranchised very quickly. I was surrounded by a lot of friends, and we were kind of all thinking of great um, visions of peace and prosperity and unification. And I guess we were all a little bit naive at the time. Um, and I got involved with some of these North Korean human rights NGOs and naively thought that we were all fighting for the same cause, human rights and peace. But then slowly with time, I realized that a lot of these groups have ulterior motives, are funded by bigger groups, even foreign governments, um, and even, allegedly some spy agencies were funding some of these groups at the time. And then I realized, you can't fight against these bigger forces. You can't have an innocent desire for peace and unification when you're faced against these bigger forces. And I felt very betrayed because I felt that I had been used by a lot of these groups and people and even politicians that I shan't name, but were basically using the foreigner to forward their political causes, and everything becomes so political here. And yeah, I just felt so angry with it all. And even though I wrote about it, my thesis was on the role of the middleman or the mediator in inter-Korean relations. So I was talking about how even though relations might not be at an all-time high, there are still ways of having indirect communications, um, so-called track 1.5, 1.2, 1.5 and track 2 diplomacy, kind of sporting events and whatnot. At a time when we were under the Park Geun-hye era, that was talking about this trust building process on the peninsula. My big question was, what trust are you talking about? If you keep on antagonizing the other side, what trust are you talking about? So I just kind of was really, really fed up with all of it, and I just wanted to run away from this toxic landscape as fast as possible. And it's still taken me 10, 15 years to slowly go back into it.
Okay, so you mentioned trust there a couple of times, and moving on a little bit from North Korea, because trust is important in in our everyday lives, and particularly in the media. We live in a time when trust in the media is not so high. So in 2020, you published an article for Elle magazine online Korean version, and you highlighted 5 reasons that you can't trust the Korean media. Did you see your Christmas party invitations here in Korea decline that year?
I don't know about Christmas invitations, but certainly I got many invitations to talk about that article. I wasn't thinking too much of it. Um, I I still remember, because I was doing a column in Elle's online edition here, and I had to pump out a story that week, and I just remember being so frustrated because I was reading some Korean articles, and it says, according to Mr. A, B did this to Mr. C and was sentenced to prison. And I was thinking, who the hell is Mr. A, B, and C? There's just no way for me to check any of this. And then, according to a source, this happened. And I was just really, really angry that I don't know what I'm reading. I have no idea if it's true or not. So I pumped out this column to talk about why I don't trust Korean media, and it went out, I think, on a Friday, and then by Monday morning it was all over the place and in all of the news bulletins. And I mentioned, I guess, a few different bullets, like the Korean media, I do think, do not fact check very much. I said that they tend to copy paste a lot. They receive press releases from companies and government organizations, and they just literally copy paste it. They might change the headline a bit, but there's no attempt to ask whether it's true or not. If an electronics company says we have developed the world's first technology that does XYZ, you will just say in your headline, world's first. You won't actually check if it's true or not. And if you do a quick search online, you might find that actually this technology was already developed a few years ago by another company in another country. I felt that there's a lot of I don't believe that there's a lot of ethics, so to speak. I think each media have their different guidelines about what to do and what not to do and how to report. But when it comes to it, you just put whatever you want in there. So if just a random example, back in the days, there was this whole kind of witch hunt against women behaving badly. So if a woman crashed a car, then you'd put in the headline, woman crashes car, when technically the headline should be car crashed by individual. But if it happened, if a man does it, then we don't mention it. But if a woman does it, then we do mention it. So no one really was batting an eyelid. I do think there's times when media inflate facts a lot, and I know this because I worked for a PR agency for 3 years here, and I could see how media would inflate stories about my clients because it looked good on paper, and so our clients were happy to just turn a blind eye because it made them look good, even though it wasn't true. Um, so just, there's just, I think there's many problems, and I'm sure there are many problems in every country, including the UK. And some people, I sometimes get comments online saying, well, what about your country? The UK is not better. I'm like, well, I never said it was, but I live in this country. I'm consuming news in Korea, and I just know that there's a long way to go. Um,
That
and
sounds like
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like every Reddit thread on like living in Korea, right? It's like such and such thing is a problem. And then the first or like most upvoted comment is, well, it happens everywhere. And it's like, yeah, but this is living in Korea forum. I suspect I know the answer to this, but in the 6 years since publishing the article, have you seen much improvement?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. Um, I do think things are improving a little bit, but overall, I think it's more or less the same thing. We still see the copy pasting, we still see the anonymous quotes, we still see the inflation of facts. What I do think has changed is I think there's so parallel to this junk that is being churned out. I do think parallel to that, there are also great storytellers, great journalists that are writing really, really, really interesting pieces and investigations. And I think the quality of that has gone up tremendously over the past 10 years. And it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you are. I think there's great journalism on both sides, including the side that you might disagree with politically. Um, Unfortunately, in this country, people don't, everything is very black and white and very divided. So you're either on one side or the other. And yeah, you might vote for one side, but I don't think it means you should boycott entirely what the other side is saying. And you'll actually find that there's reasonable people on both sides, and there's always something new to learn and understand from both sides.
Just for our listeners, could you share some of the journalists that you just talked about? Really, like, think just gave a glowing review of, like, who are the voices that you recommend our listeners go and search for when they want to learn about Korea?
I don't have any names to give you. I just think, and also I'm not very good with names. I just think um, it's it's. I think it's important to give every media a chance. Um, I recommend reading editorials on a daily basis. Read the editorials from the Chosun Ilbo, read the editorials from the Hangare, read everything in between. See what the grievances on both sides are. Um, you'll, like, for example, now we have the new um, law that has come into effect regulating AI, and it's being portrayed as something that is needed by a lot of media. But actually, if you read what's being said on both sides, a lot of people have concerns about this law. Not to say that it doesn't have good intentions, but yeah, I think it's just always interesting to read what two different sides are saying, and sometimes notice that there's not too much difference on both sides. I think when it comes to political news or political attacks, sometimes it can get a bit, it can get a little bit heated. But when it comes to actual issues that affect you and me, um, yeah, there's great work on both sides.
Well, you mentioned, the editorial, read an editorial and, try and get a diverse range of opinions. So Steve Jobs, someone I am known to admire, once said that I don't want to see us descend into a nation of bloggers. I think we need editorial oversight now more than ever. So based on what you just described, and in your previous interviews, you've mentioned about YouTubers being present at press conferences and how they have the same credentials as you. Do you agree with his warning? And what do you think of this new class of creators using, various methods, long form video, podcasts, AI? Do you think we can still strengthen journalism rather than weaken it?
I, you know, I don't know when Steve Jobs said that, but I must admit that I agree. I agree with him because uh, it's now become easier than ever before to be called a media, to be called a journalist. And I don't want to be gatekeeping here. I think anyone, has the right to be anything. But um, as what was it that Spider-Man said was great power comes great responsibility, and you have a huge response if you have a large following and you're on YouTube and you have 500,000 followers or more, and now a lot of people of all ages are consuming the the news from YouTube these days in Korea, in many other countries. Um, you have to be careful about, is what you're listening to, is it an opinion? Is it is it based on truth? Is it based on fact? Um, and also, I think these days, I do, I don't want to sound um, like a grumpy old man, but I do have concerns about the younger generation who are brought up using smartphones. Back in my days, we'd read a book. But I mean, they're just born with a smartphone in their hand and they're just consuming YouTube and TikTok all day long, and that has become their source of news. And I have nothing against it. I have nothing against consuming news in different formats, but when anybody can just say whatever they want, um, and we're not being taught, or the people are not being taught how to critically think or question the content that they're consuming, I do worry. And I do believe that this is what is causing a lot of the chaos in the world and divisions in the world right now, is specifically because of social media. Um, of course, I think fake news is a huge issue. And I'm not saying fake news didn't exist before, but I think traditionally, if you read an article in a newspaper, it would, people would take time to write it and make phone calls and try and get their things out. And if they made mistakes, the next day in the paper, they would put a notice that they had made a little mistake or something. But now, I mean, it's all up for grabs, and we're encouraged to pump out more sensational things. And the more sensational it is, the easier it is to get clicks and to get revenue, because journalists don't get paid a lot of money these days. At a time when the landscape is so saturated and anybody and everybody can be called a journalist. So we're all desperate for those hits. And now these algorithms are kind of promoting narratives and stories that might not be true. So sorry for rambling, but yeah, I have a lot of concerns about these, about where this is all going, whether journalists, I mean, in the traditional sense, will be relevant anymore versus a 16-year-old in their bedroom on YouTube saying something that might not be true, and that becoming the truth for everyone in that person's generation. I do worry quite a lot.
Well, no, I think it's interesting you bring up fake news because it's pretty topical, right? The National Assembly just passed a fake news law. God, could you what are your thoughts on that law? Like, do you think this is like a step in the right direction? What do you think?
I'm still trying to compose my thoughts about this at the moment. It's funny because this law to combat fake news was proposed 5 years ago in 2021, and it caused so much backlash back then that the president had to basically pull back and say that it was just a plan after all. And there were lots of press freedom groups, both nationally and internationally, that condemned this law. And even the foreign media groups, including one that I'm part of, issued a statement at the time saying that we have concerns that this might silence the media. So this was what happened 5 years ago. And then this law basically passed through the National Assembly in I think in December. And of course, on paper, anti-fake news sounds like a good thing. We want to combat fake news, and everyone is in favor of this. I think when you just say law against fake news, I think everyone can agree that it's not a healthy thing. I think the times have changed as well. When we have an ex-president now that declared martial law, that was consuming conspiracy theories allegedly on these far-right YouTube channels, getting sucked into this kind of stuff and claiming, these anti-state forces have taken over parliament and eventually causing martial law chaos that is now being called an insurrection. When we have this kind of landscape, I think it's when we talk about fake news, I think no one will be against it. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why this law passed so easily without too much opposition. Because if you say that you are against this law, or you're here to protect these far-right YouTubers, then it means that you're part of the problem. So I think that's one of the reasons why there was no opposition to this law that passed. Again, I guess the devil is in the detail. If you look at it more closely, as far as I understand, because I'm not a legal expert and it's not so easy to understand, but basically you could be held liable, or you could be taken to court if what you publish is in part false. So it's a bit vague. What does in part false mean? And also you kind of have to prove in court that what you did was not malicious, and you made an error in good faith. But again, what does it mean in practice? If you write a story about an evil conglomerate that has done a lot of misdeeds, and in your reporting you make a mistake, a little error, a number is wrong or something like that, then maybe you could be sued by this big conglomerate saying you have deliberately defamed us or deliberately spread fake news by claiming this, and you deliberately did it. And the reason that it was deliberate is because you're making a profit out of this, because your media is making money. So you have, the burden is on the media or the journalist to prove that you didn't do it on purpose, I guess. I mean, to be honest, there are a lot of questions, and we don't know yet because no one's been taken to court. But I think some people are saying that this could have a chilling effect on media who might not want to touch stories, or smaller media, because they know that they might not be able to win in court versus powerful figures. politicians, lawyers at big groups. So I think, you know, I think even though the law has passed and has been promulgated by the president and will take effect in the summer, I think, I think there's still a lot of questions to be had, a lot of conversations. I don't know if it's too late. I don't know. I don't know what we can do now. But I just wonder, why was there so much opposition 5 years ago, and now? I mean, there was opposition this time round, but it just went under the carpet because any opposition looks like you'd be supporting the pro-insurrectionists. So I think there are concerns and a conversation to be had.
This is one of those things, as one of the very first things I learned when I, knew I was going to be living here was you need to be careful if you write a review, and that review is negative, because that person might be able to, one, remove your review, and then two, might be able to take you to court for that review, and you wouldn't think, review a restaurant, if it's bad, as long as you're not going too hard at them, a fair review is a fair review. But I didn't quite expect it to be so worrisome. Like, sometimes I worry, and these days, I might not write the review. I just be like, just move on.
And what I think about when I hear that is, obviously fake news is a problem, and there's something definitely unethical and really poisonous to journalism when people can just make a story without having actual, just have an opinion and express it as if it's a journalistic fact. But also, in doing this, you're creating this architecture that could, even if it's used now for the intended purpose, you're creating a future architecture that can be misused. So it's really dangerous. I can't help but think about what's going on back home. We had the Homeland Security Act passed, after 9/11, which is, of course, at this shocking moment where pretty much everyone, it was if you were against any legislation, right, that was proposed, you were seen as being if you're a politician, it was pretty damaging for you. So you had to jump on the bandwagon at that moment. But it kind of led to these institutions and surveillance instruments that we're seeing being used to just target political opposition in the States right now. So, no, it's so tricky, especially, I think, from my perspective, fake news is a huge issue too. It's really concerning, how to having people stew in that. But then, I don't know. Yeah, I feel like it's something that is not resolved yet. It is definitely not resolved.
You're absolutely right when you say, everyone can agree, anti-fake news law. If it stops there, great. But the devil's in the detail, right? And then when we saw, in the last couple of weeks, the situation in Iran, there was a news story. I can't remember the publication, but it was about Twitter accounts related to Scottish independence had suddenly gone dark. These Twitter accounts that had been very pro-Scottish independent, the Iranian internet blackout had silenced these accounts. And it's ooh, now that's something I would like to stop, and I think, there's not a country, a government on earth that wouldn't like to stop foreign meddling when it's so easy in the internet environment that we live in. Strange times.
So, yeah, no, it is definitely some strange times we're living in. And Raphael, you've talked a lot about, we're going to go back to this theme of change again, just because you've seen so much and learned so much in your role as a journalist. But what about political change? Everyone thinks about K-pop, K-drama, these cultural things. But Korea has a very vibrant democracy and a very tumultuous political landscape. I was introduced to that actually the first day I arrived in Korea. I walked into a rally where they were waving American flags, and I I had no idea like what I was getting into, and I was like, "Oh, this is awesome. This is great. I'm so welcome here." Um, and only to realize like this, like exactly the nature of it later. So could you just talk about how you've seen Korea change politically, and where you feel the country is now?
Uh, has it changed politically? Yeah, yeah. We had a. I mean, Korea had a president that was impeached 10 years ago, and then now it's happened again. Um, on the one hand, we talk about progress, and then the same thing happens, if not worse. It's yeah. Back in the days, everyone thought Park Geun-hye was the devil, um, and looking back, what she did versus what um, former President Yoon Suk Yeol did, I don't think you can compare the two. Um, we talk about. I think Korea on the outside looks like a modern, vibrant, blossoming democracy, and I do think, in part, I think it is true. I do think power to the people, and it is the people that brought down this kind of authoritarian figure that is going through the courts right now, and is the has prosecutors have requested the death penalty. I mean, that's a different issue, but I do think in that sense, Korea is an advanced democracy when it comes to the people, but and what they can achieve. But when it comes to the politics, I don't know. It's just, I mean, I guess again you can say this about many other countries, but it's just all a show. It's all theatrics, all for votes. And if I probably one of the topics that I have followed the most over the past, roughly 10 years or so is the inability to enact an anti-discrimination law. And I, it's just, I mean, it's all politics. I mean, to, to just kind of summarize briefly, it would be a law that would say, please do not discriminate against age, gender, place of origin, nationality, skin color, sexual orientation, so on and so forth. But because of that one word, sexual orientation, these like minority vocal churches believe that this is the devil's clause, and the entire country will become um, well, the entire country will become gay, and the birth rate will plummet, and bankrupt. The society will become bankrupt, and children will become promiscuous. I mean, it's all this. I mean, ridiculous fear mongering, and because of this issue within certain religious groups, this law just cannot pass, and politicians do not want to touch it. They haven't touched it for 20 years. Every time someone dares to touch it, then they just get bullied into a corner by these religious groups. Um, and I wonder, uh, what when is a good moment, when would be a good moment to pass this law? People say we need, I mean, the politicians say we need social consensus, and it needs time, but when will that be? When is next time? um and I just feel like it's all about votes. Now it's going to be, there's an election in June, so now it's all about that election. And then when we finish with that one, then it will be about the next parliamentary election or the next presidential election. And no one, it's just it sometimes seems to be a bit like a joke on both sides. And I guess, sometimes I wonder if there's much difference between the left and the right in this country. They just have different names, but sometimes I wonder if they're not the same. Um, I don't know. if politicians truly want to represent the people or just represent their own vested interests.
Let's hope for the former. Um, has your relationship changed with Korea during your time here? Not just politics, but you came here. You said 2006, wide-eyed, wondrous. Has it changed?
um, I think what's changed is difficult to say. But I think what's changed is now I just feel like here I am, take me for what I am, and if you don't like it, you can get lost. That's the way I feel now. I don't feel like I need to be on my. How can I say? I'm not the guest that is here temporarily. I'm here to stay, and I'm not here to be. Um, I'm here to be myself. And some people will like me, some people won't like me. But the same is true for your Korean neighbor. You can't get rid of them. They are there, they are who they are, and some people will like it, some people won't like that person, and that's just the way it is. So I think I kind of graduated from that phase where I felt like I was the outsider and I have to be careful. I'm not saying I should break the law or something, but I just don't, you know, I don't really believe in this kind of like, oh, you're the foreigner and, you should be a foreigner on TV and do foreign things. I'm like, just get over it. Just do your own thing and live your own life, and so be it. And that's it. Some people I still sometimes hear some people complain, like foreign residents complaining, like, "Oh my God, people are staring at me in the subway," and I don't know. I mean, I'm like, really? I mean, maybe it's because you're just untidy, or like maybe they're looking at you for another reason. But I just don't think. I think Koreans have also gotten over this whole exotic foreigner thing, and um, you know, you do you, I do me, and end of story. There's nothing more, nothing less. And so I think that's my kind of big realization over the years.
I think we've kind of come full circle where you're now saying conformity just isn't for you.
But I think it's encouraging that a lot of young people as well are also being themselves, and more they are choosing to do what they want to do, hang out with the people they want to hang out with, experiment in their own ways, and I do, at the same time I am very encouraged by um, by the way things are changing, and I think for the better. So in a way, I do have hope for kind of our generation. At the same time, uh, kind of vocal minorities, I think, are exploiting uh, our weaknesses and naivety, and we've seen how those kind of forces play out in the UK, in Europe, in the US, and I think we can learn a lot from what we see abroad, and can only assume that the same um, toxicity will be coming to Korea. I think it's already here, but it's not too big. You know, uh, so I have hope, but at the same time, I'm, I guess, cautiously optimistic. I don't want to say it's um, all positive, but I do wonder what's going to happen in Korea 5 years or 10 years down the line. Are we going to see the same craziness that we're seeing in other countries, or will people be more mature and be able to overcome these kind of dark forces.
Yeah, well, it's a bit bleak, but why don't we try to we try to end on a bit of a positive note. So, just if you're for any people who are interested and many listeners who are interested in becoming journalists and walking down a similar path that you have, do you have any thoughts or pearls of wisdom to share with those people?
Don't do it. If you want to be broke, don't do it. Um, it's I don't. I guess, yeah. A lot of a lot of people have been in touch over the years saying that they want to go into journalism, and in a way, I look back at when I was doing computer science, and I wonder, why are you doing this, or what is it that you want to achieve? Um, if you want to make money, I would say don't do it. Unless you work for a big US media, then maybe, you'll be able to pay your bills. But otherwise, I, I guess, what is it that you want to achieve? And I think if you want to become a journalist, the biggest thing that you need is an open mind, an open and curious mind. And if you have it, great. If you don't, maybe consider something else. If you want to become a doctor and help people, that's great. But are you willing to perform open heart surgery? I think it's not, it's not for everyone. It can be tough. A lot of, um, there's a lot of work and research and rejections, especially if you do freelance. A lot of rejections, and um, you know, I've had some kind of students or graduates of journalist schools contacting me saying that they want to be journalists, and then I'd say, okay, well, what are you interested in, or what do you want to write about? And then they don't really know, so I'm like, well, uh, you know. You can learn the tricks of the trade, but what is it that you want to do? What is it that you want to achieve? In my case, I want to, I feel like I want to make a difference in this world. I always approach a story thinking, if this story comes out, however negative it may be, I'm not doing it to slag people off or slag an entire country off. It was the hope that, well, if you talk about this aspect that might not be very positive, well, if people read it and they don't like it, maybe there'll be change. And I do believe that, for me at least, there needs to be a kind of meaning behind what you write. And if there is no meaning, then and personally, I'm not really interested. Um, so yeah, ask yourself what is it that you want to achieve? Is it just to be famous? Is it to have a byline? Is it to to expose big companies? Wrongdoings. What is it that you want to achieve? And I think that's more important than having a flashy degree, because if you have enough money, I guess you can go to a prestigious university and do a good course. That's great. If you want to write fancy, beautiful sentences, well, that's great. You can just use AI these days to do that for you. Um, but but what is it that you want to bring to the table? And fortunately, well, I hope that AI still hasn't, resolved that issue yet. And so, we still need human brains. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
That's a really happy note to end on. If we can all find the reason why we get out of bed in the morning. I like that. That's good. All right. With that, then, that concludes this episode of the Foreign Tigers podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, Raphael. It's been a really lovely conversation.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.